Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, we're going to talk about the structure of the heart. Now, this is in chapter 6, and we're going to give you a sort of a brief review of the anatomy. It's not a ton you need to know from a testing perspective, but just from a purely knowledge perspective, it actually is pretty interesting. You would probably already know some of the main structures, such as the atrium, right? An individual atrium, two atria, and the ventricles. So ventricle or ventricles, right? So there's 4 main chambers, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Normally, we will divide the heart into a left and a right side. Left side with respect to the individual. So when you're looking at this video, you're going to see the left side of me as my right side, right? Because it's kind of a mirror image. But that's not how we determine the left and the right side of structures in the body itself. So the left side of the heart is on my left side. Okay, so the one closer to my left arm, right? So if you're looking at the video and you're thinking to yourself, what's left? This is your left side of the heart, right side of the heart. The designation, by the way, is made because of the different functional capacities that the heart ventricles and atria have with respect to where the blood is being pumped. So the left side of the heart is going to pump blood to the what's known as systemic circulation, right, out through the aorta all the way down through the entire body, whereas the right side of the heart is what's known as the pulmonary or cardiac pulmonary pumping system. So the right side of the heart is going to pump blood directly to the lungs to be oxygenated, brought back. And that's generally why we have these 2 distinctions. The other couple of things to keep in mind is the left side of the heart, or at least the left ventricle, right? Ventricles on the bottom, atria on top. The left ventricle versus the right ventricle is significantly more powerful, has much greater pumping, squeezing power than the right ventricle. And that actually makes sense because remember, the left ventricle is pumping to the systemic circulatory system. So it's got to get the blood all the way out to right down to the feet, to your head, which is not that bad. Head at least has gravity pulling it down, but to the feet, and then it's got to continue to pump blood all the way through the systemic circulation. And then the right ventricle only basically, think about it this way: if your heart is sitting right here in the center of your chest, for the most part, maybe offset a little bit, all it has to do is pump it right to the lungs. So it's pumping strength, so to speak, or pumping power does not have to be that much, other than the fact that it has to pump hard enough to get that blood to perfuse through the pulmonary capillaries, right? All the capillaries in the lungs themselves. So it's not like it's an easy job, but at least it's significantly less than the left ventricle. And now if you take a look at chapter 6, page 155, basically 155, 156, I guess you go 157, is going to give you pretty much the material that you need, or at least to understand. And I would direct you, obviously, to figure 6.3, pulmonary and systemic sides of the heart, right? So the right side of the heart is pulmonary, left side systemic. Go ahead and take a look at these definitions on the side panel. Now that begins on 154 because, essentially there's 3 type of muscle tissue, right? We have skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Guess which kind the heart is? Yeah, it's cardiac tissue. So it's unique in certain ways. And of course, it is an involuntary type of muscle. So you've got skeletal muscles, which are voluntary. In other words, I think about it and I contract my bicep. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about or think about contracting the muscle fibers in my heart or in other smooth tissue. They are what we call involuntary muscles, meaning that there's no sort of cognitive connection between whether the muscles contract or they don't contract, right? They do it on their own because of autonomic systems that ensure that the electrical triggers are done on a regular basis, consistent basis, without you having to think about it. So cardiac muscle sort of has this unique capacity to contract all the time, forever, until you die, right? So you don't have to think about it. It generally will never stop unless there is an issue and doctor has to restart it. But for the most part, from the day you're born to the day you die, your heart never stops pumping. It is sort of the ultimate endurance muscle. Now, there are some other interesting things you can read about in the very top portion here of the page 154, right? Cardiac muscle, skeletal smooth, myofibrils, sarcomeres. One of the interesting things, of course, about the structure of the heart as well are what we call intercalated discs. These are unique to cardiac muscle, and they basically ensure they kind of hold all the fibers of cardiac muscle fibers together, but they also act as electrical sort of pathways between muscle cells. So you think about it, essentially, all of the muscle cells in your heart need to contract rhythmically, right? So you can't have a couple contracting here and some not contracting. Essentially, there has to be a smooth contractile sequence so that the heart continues to pump rhythmically from the atria down to the ventricles out to the right to wherever they're pumping, pulmonary or systemic circulation. And so these intercalated discs actually ensure that happens. And you can read that in here, but let's go over on page 155. Smooth muscle is just the other organ systems of the body, like your intestines, things like that. And they go through their own rhythmic, automated, autonomic contractions, right, without you having to think about it. Myofibrils, one of the key here is, now remember, the concept of the myofibril is what we normally talk about with respect to skeletal muscle. Now, again, there's, of course, all muscle, whether all three types, have myofibrils. And so in the heart, the myofibrils in the heart, just like you're going to see with the other muscle fiber types, are made up of the myofilaments. Cardiac muscle is a little different. So sarcomere is the structural unit of a myofibril. Remember, myofibrils are the contractile components of a muscle cell, and they contain they are contained within within the myofibril, the actin and myosin filaments, right? The sliding filament theory. Deeper down in there, you have the structural unit of the myofibril, actin and myosin filaments between what are known as Z lines. Atrium or atria, multiple is atria, and atrium, like the left atrium, right atrium, or atria, those are on top, and they are much smaller holding units for blood before they push that blood, essentially squeeze the blood down into the lower ventricles. Okay. And so atria receive blood from either the lungs, right, left atrium, or from the systemic circulation, the right atrium. So the right atrium receives blood from the body, and then the right atrium pushes it down into the right ventricle, and then the right ventricle is what pumps it to the lungs. What we call perfusion occurs, where carbon dioxide is released. I breathe it out, and as I inhale, whatever oxygen is in the air is going to now go into the circulatory system via the alveoli of the lungs, yada yada. But then that blood that has now been reoxygenated makes its way over to the left atrium. The left atrium now is going to push it down into the left ventricle, and that left ventricle is just raring to go to take that blood. It's going to take in his blood from the atrium and squeeze it out through the aorta, which is the largest artery in your body, and the whole cycle begins. Okay, the blood goes out through the systemic circulation, and then the time it takes for the blood to move through, provide oxygen, nutrients to all the cells of the body, living cells of the body, and then it's going to make its way back up, deoxygenated at this point, back up into the right atrium. And that's why when you look at the picture, figure 6.3, you've seen this since you were in 4th grade, probably. The right side is blue and the left side is red to denote oxygenated red and deoxygenated blue. It's actually not blue, but it's more of a almost a brownish, dull burgundy color. But because of the venous system and the muscular nature of veins, it almost looks bluish, but that's neither here nor there. Ventricle, the inferior or the lower, right? Superior atria, inferior ventricles. of the heart that pumps blood to the lungs and the body. If you move over to figure 6.4, the path of blood. Now, again, lots of arrows. It's helpful to kind of get an idea of what's going on. Remember what I said, left ventricle pushes the blood out through the aorta. And here's a couple of interesting things, just so you know. Before anybody else gets blood, the heart beats blood to itself, right? And that's done through a network of arteries, arterioles, and then capillaries, obviously, in the heart. So as you see, if you look at that picture, the aorta, as it comes up over to the ascending and then to the descending aorta, you're going to notice these three pathways on the top of the aorta. I hope you've seen that at the very top of the picture. That's where blood is going to go up first. Boom, boom, boom. It's going to go up through the to the head, to the brain, and it's also going to pump blood immediately to itself. The heart has to have a lot of blood, and of course we'll see a number of different issues and problems if the heart does not get the blood it needs. And so that's just an interesting thing to keep in mind, that before everybody else gets their due of the oxygenated blood, the heart's going to take its own supply, right? Because obviously it's the main pump. It needs to be taken care of first and foremost. You have what's known as the circumflex artery and a couple of other arteries that are the main suppliers of blood and thereby oxygen to the heart itself. If you ever heard of a myocardial infarction or heart attack, that's generally there's multiple ways that can occur, but generally you'll see what's known as the circumflex artery, which makes its way down and essentially ensures that the left ventricle is receiving enough oxygen. You'll see that would be the one where you might have a blockage, and if that happens, they call that one, I think that's known as the widow maker, simply because if that one gets blocked, that's different percentages of blockage could basically eliminate all oxygen going to the left ventricle, and then you're done. Okay, so that's interesting information. Another interesting thing to keep in mind is over on page 157, these are the SA node and the AV node, or the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node. These are your two, kind of think of them as a plug. These are your electrical outlets, so to speak. And you've got two of them because the SA node located in the right atrium, and you can see that. You might want to just draw a little circle around it on page 157 on figure 6.5. This node initiates the electrical signal that causes the entire heart to beat. So essentially, the SA node is the initial trigger. It receives that trigger on a regular basis from the brain, and that starts the electrical conduction system, stimulates the myocardial cells to contract in a regular rhythmic pattern, often referred to as normal sinus rhythm. So that's kind of the idea, hence sino, right? Sinus rhythm. And then of course the AV node located between the atria and the ventricles. Once again, there you go. You can see that you should draw a little circle because the little yellow lines are nerves. Between the atria, this node delays the impulse from the sinoatrial node before allowing it to pass to the ventricles. Hope that makes sense. You have these two electrical plugs. One is starting the process and the other is putting a stop to it at just the right time for just the right amount of time to ensure that you have atrial rhythmic contractions and then ventricular. Otherwise, it's really kind of cool. The ability of the heart's conduction systems to create immediate contraction would cause the entire heart to go. Think about that. All four chambers of the heart would literally contract simultaneously. That's not good, obviously. So the AV node is actually designed to put a little bit of a pause, a very slight pause between the initiating contraction from the SA node, initiating electrical impulse, trigger from the SA node to before the ventricles then go into their contraction. It's one of the things, if you've ever heard like your heart, you can hear it thump, 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 right? If you've ever heard that. Now, technically what's happening is you got remember, there's 4 chambers. So technically you should be hearing thump, 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 thump. It's not how it works. In general, when your heart is beating, it's receiving a single electrical signal. Technically, you've got both atria going at the same time. Sometimes you can hear an offset with that, and then there's a slight delay. I forgot what the actual, it's been a long time, but it's just like a half a second or something like that, where there's a slight delay before you get pump, pump, right? So atria, pump, and then ventricle pump. And that's what that AV node is doing. So quite often, and again, this is just a little bit of additional information, it can be a huge problem if you have an AV node issue, because if you have a dysrhythmia, if the rhythmic pattern of contraction in the heart is off at all, it throws off the entire circulatory system. Obviously, there's bigger problems there as well when it comes to just the heart itself. But that's what the SA node is. The SA node initiates the impulse that it receives from specific area of the brain, by the way. And then there is this very minor delay. Literally, the only difference space-wise between the SA node and the AV node is probably, I don't know, less than an inch, maybe an inch. So you got this one little electrical node and then another one down here, right? You see where the SA and AV node is. And so ultimately, it's got to be so perfectly timed to allow for this rhythmic pumping of the heart. Go talk to a cardiologist. I'm sure they'd love to explain to you how all of this works. And as it says at the very end of this one paragraph, the delay in impulse allows the ventricles to fill with blood from the atria prior to contracting. Again, the idea is that the speed of electrical conduction in the human body is blisteringly fast. It only takes milliseconds, hundreds of a second, for nerve impulses to reach different areas. So again, the speed with which the SA node to AV node impulse would occur would be literally like that, instantaneous as far as you and I are concerned. There has to be a slight, the AV node has to delay things just slightly enough to where that ventricle has filled. Because again, if the atria is full and it contracts and the ventricle contracts simultaneously, which is exactly what would happen if you didn't have an AV node, they would both contract. There's no blood in the ventricle. There's got to be this delay, right? Because the atria, watch how I do this. The atria is on top, right? So the atria fills up because the ventricle has just contracted. Now watch, as the atria squeezes the blood down, the ventricle gets the blood and it squeezes, and you get this sort of action here like this. So atria fills up, the ventricle contracts for the most part. And that's your brief review of the heart. Not sure how many questions, if any, you're going to get on the heart anatomy, but it is helpful to understand the basic concept, specifically for when you start to really understand cardiorespiratory training. That's why they want you to know a fair amount about this. And it's also pretty helpful if a client tells you that they have some sort of electrical issue related to the heart. With all of that said and done, please make sure that if you understood and this was helpful to you in this video, type the word understand in our comment section below. By the way, if you want full access to the NASM exam study prep that we provide at Body Design University, please go ahead and just click on the link in the description box below. Also, remember, every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 to 6:30, we play Quizlet Live. It's a great way to help you study, learn the terms and concepts that are going to then help you to pass the NASM exam. As always, have a great week. See you next week. Bye.